That the fourth chapter hasn't actually been read, so because the original upload had no audio, but the original upload's been deleted, so I might as well read this now. Chapter 4: A Racist Wonderkind. Remember John Cotton and Richard Mather, the partition to get all the American race ball rolling? Well, it turns out they had a grandson. Well, not the two of them together, obviously, but Richard Mather's wife dies, John Cotton dies, Richard Mather marries John Cotton's widow, Sarah. Richard Mather's youngest son, Increase, marries Sarah's daughter Maria, making her his wife and stepsister. Increase and Maria have a son, February 12, 1663. They name him after both families. Cotton and Mather becomes Cotton Mather. By the time Cotton Mather heard about Bacon's rebellion, he was already in college. An 11-year-old Harvard student, the youngest of all of time. He was obviously a nerd, and on top of that, he was extremely religious. He knew he was special, or at least meant to be, which was, of course, did nothing but fill his fellow classmates with spite. They wanted desperately to break him down, make him sin, because no one likes a show-off. Basically, Cotton Mather was obsessed with being perfect and blamed himself for everything wrong or different with him, believing even his stutter, with which he struggled, was due to something sinfully he'd done. Because he was so insecure about his speech impediment, Cotton Mather took to writing, and eventually he would write more sermons than any other politician in history. By the time he graduated from Harvard, he overcome his stutter, which to him, of course, was a deliverance from God. Being delivered from his sputter was a good thing, because he was destined for the pulpit. The grandson of two Puritan preachers had to grow up to be one. No other choice. There was no better way to begin his career as a clergyman than for him to co-pastor his father's, also a preacher's church. But while he was avoiding his bullies at Harvard, trying to use his words and doing anything he could to walk down a righteous path in the eyes of God, there was a tension brewing between New England and Old England. England. Oh, yeah. In 1676, an English consul administrator, Edward Randolph, had journeyed to New England to see the damage done by a comet, the indigenous war hero, and his warriors. Randolph reported this back to King Charles II and suggested they tighten the grip around New England, because clearly the New World experiment wasn't going so well. So now Big Brother was trying to step in and clean up Little Brother's mess, which meant Massachusetts would lose local rule if it didn't defy the king. Of course, the other option was for the colonists to just fall in line. But this would mean giving up everything they worked hard to build. Defiance seemed like a stronger play, and in 1689, New Englanders did just that. The thing about revolution is that almost always has to do with poor, angry people about being manipulated by the rich. So Cotton Mather thought a recent graduate of Harvard and a God-fearing, well-read man had a problem in his hands because he was rich. He come from an elite family, gotten an elite education, and lived an elite through piteous life, far from the planters and even farther than the slaves. So the Revolution of 1688, which was called the Glorious Revolution, was not so glorious to him, and fearing that the anger that caused the uprising would go from the British elites to the elites right at home. Meaning he created a new villain as a distraction, an invisible demon Cue the screen music. Mather wrote a book called Memorial Providences, relating to witchcraft and possessions. That's right. Mather, the genius boy, destined for intellectual and spiritual greatness, was obsessed with witches. And this obsession would set a fire he couldn't have seen coming, but welcomed as the will of God. Mather's book, outlining the symptoms of witchcraft, reflected his crusade against the enemies of white souls. His father was just as obsessed, but no one poured gasoline in the witchy fire like a minister in Salem, Massachusetts, named Samuel Paris. In 1692, when Paris's 9-year-old daughter suffered convulsions and chokes, he believed she'd been possessed or cursed by a witch. That was all it took. The witch hunt begun. Over the next few months, as witching intenses continued to happen, people continued to be accused of witchcraft, which luckily for folks like Cotton Mather turned attention away from the political and on to the religious. And in nearly every instance, the devil, who was preying upon innocent black patricians, was described as black. Of course, one accuser described the devil as a little black bearded man. Another saw a black thing of a considerable bigness. A black thing jumped out of one man's window. The body was like that of a monkey, the observer added. The feet like a chicken's butt. The face like a man's. Since the devil represented criminality, and since criminals in New England were said to be the devil's minions, the Salem witch hunt made the black face the face of criminality. It was like racist algebra. Solve for X, solve for Y, solve for anything other than truth. Once the witch hunt eventually died down, the Massachusetts authorities apologized to the accused, reserved the convictions of the trials, and provided reparations in the early 70s. But Cotton Mather never stopped defending the Salem witch trials, because he never stopped defending the religious, slaveholding, gender, class, and racial hierarchies informed by the trials. He saw himself as a defender of God's law and the conviction of any non-Parisian African, Native American, poor person, or woman who defied God's law by not submitting to it. And if just as went with the theorists who came before him, the racist children of Zeruda, Cotton Mather's ideas and writings from Massachusetts throughout the land were just two things were happening. Boston was becoming the intellectual capital of the new America, and tobacco was taking off, booming, which meant more slaves were needed in order to manage it. As the population of enslaved people grew, which is what slaveholders needed in order to till the land and grow the tobacco for free, the fear of more revolt grew with it. Seems that it was a natural feeling response to such a unnatural system. So in order to keep their human property from rising up, slaveholders and politicians created a new unnatural system, a new set of racist codes. No interracial relationships, tax and captives, classify natives and blacks the same way you would horses and hogs in the tax code, meaning they were literally classified as livestock and not human. Blacks couldn't hold office. All black property owned by a slave is sold, which of course contributes to black property. Oh, and white indentured servants who were freed and rewarded 50 acres of property, of course contributed to white prosperity. And while all of this was going on, all this semantic knife-turning, all this racist political play, all the violence and discrimination, Cotton Mather, all high and mighty, was still trying to convince people that the only thing necessary, the only mission of slavery had to be to save the souls of the slaves, because though they have Savagery the enslaved would turn to be more whitened, purified. Enslavers became more open to these ideas over time, right until the first Great Awakening, which swept through the colonies in the 1730s, spearheaded by a Connecticut man named Jonathan Edwards. Edwards, whose father had studied upon increased matter, was a direct descendant of the Matthews Puritans throughout. He spoke about human equality in soul and the capability of everyone for conservation. And as this racist Christian awakening began to evolve, as people like Edwards carried the torch of torture, Cotton Mather continued to age. In 1728, on his 65th birthday, he called his church pastors into the room for a prayer. The next day, Cotton Mather, one of New England's greatest God-fearing scholars, was dead. But you don't know how death is. Your body goes, but your ideas don't. Your impact lingers on, even when it's poisonous. Some bodies get put into the ground and daisies bloom. Others encourage the sprouting of weeds that work to strangle whatever living and growing around them. And that's all there is.